started. Welcome everybody. I'm so glad that you're here. My name's Hannah Trott. If you don't know, I'm president of PTCO. And I'm just going to start tonight off with just a Bible verse. Just going to keep it a short devotion so we have time to talk to our panel. But I wrote it up here. It's from Romans 8:28, and it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." And I like that verse, and I thought I would share with you guys tonight. So I'm going to pray for us, and then we'll hear from everyone on the PTCO Council. God, I just thank you so much for everything that we have. And I think that we are all so blessed to be at this university and to be able to come to meetings like this and have people come in and be willing to talk to us and just give us advice to be teachers. And I just thank you that you've called us all to be educators, and I pray that all the information that we hear tonight, we will be able to take it and help us do your works that you called us to do. And I just thank you for this day and pray for any requests that anyone has, that you will hear them. And in your name, amen. Okay. Our secretary, Dustin, is gone, but Leslie, do you have any announcements to share?
The only announcements that I'm aware of is that you can watch any of the missed meetings on YouTube. They have a specific site that you can subscribe to, and it'll come through for that. And if you have any questions or anything you need to let one of us know, you can either email Dustin or you can email me, and I can get it to Dustin. And as far as that, just remember that in order to become a member, you need to complete 4 of the 6 meetings, have 2 hours of community service, and have 2 hours of fundraising. And that's what's on the sign-up sheet out there.
Okay, and our treasurers?
Our total for our PTCO account is $1,946.
Community service, do any of you ladies have anything?
Yes, Aaron Trexler has emailed me back about last time when we talked about him getting people together to rake yards for people or people who can't do their yard work. So as soon as I get that email, I'll send it to Hannah. We can send it out. Otherwise, if you need community service hours, just check on the teacher education website on Moodle, because there's a lot of great opportunities on there.
Okay, and our fundraising ladies aren't here.
The gentleman not here, you can
John.
Oh, that's you.
Okay, so we have a fundraising event on April 10th at Chick-fil-A. We're waiting on a time. There's 3 ways you can get hours for this. You can bring 2 friends and purchase dinner. It says they have to pay for their own. Bummer. You can pass out 10 flyers and make sure they're just not playing around. That would be not useful. Make sure information gets in a church bulletin, or you can text 10 friends with information and post information on Facebook.
That's great. Do our historians have anything to announce? No?
Nope. If anybody wants to help with scrapbook pages, they can let us know. That can be something you want to do on your own time if you're just feeling creative, but you don't want to maybe commit to a certain time or place. Just we could give you some photos and materials, and you could get that to us.
All right, and did everyone get their name to Emily to enter for door prizes? Or okay, Dr. Lamar has
You know what, can I just be at the end?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to welcome our panel. If you could all give them a round. Do you all want to introduce yourselves?
Is that what you'd like us to do? All right. I'll go ahead and start. My name is Angela Thrasher, and I'm the principal at Havencroft, just your neighboring elementary school. And this is my 4th year at Havencroft, my 18th year in education.
And I'm Mary Stewart. I'm the principal at Wyandotte High School in Kansas City, Kansas. High school of about 1,400 students with about 25, 30 different languages spoken and students from all over the world. A pretty amazing place. So I look forward to talking to you more about opportunities.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm Glenn Supis. I have a daughter out there somewhere in the crowd. I'm superintendent of Smoky Valley. That is about 3 hours straight west of here. We're a 4A school. And I've been superintendent there 13 years.
And I'm Mike Walgast. I'm the principal at Pioneer Trail Middle School here in Olathe. That's over at 127th and Black Bottom. This is my 5th year there, 6th year in Olathe. And I was in the Shawnee Mission School District prior to that. So.
We have questions for you guys on your sheets up there. We can just go down the list or skip them, whatever you guys feel like you want to answer. But we can start off with the first one that says, what can we do now to prepare for our jobs as future teachers?
Stick it on the road, is that what you
Yeah,
like?
that's fine.
Well, when I was looking at that question, I think the biggest thing that you guys can do now to prepare is to start looking at what districts have openings and start seeing, you know, what are you looking for in a school district and what do those districts that have openings have to offer? Because I feel like that's really important for you to find a district that really fits what you're looking for and what you want and what they have to offer you. So really start exploring right now what's coming out there and what the different districts have to offer you.
And to kind of piggyback with that, I think a real important thing for you to do right now is to learn yourself. It's going to be really important for you to kind of understand where your passion is, and because this work isn't easy, and you're going to need to draw on that passion. It's going to be what propels you forward when your eyes are tired and you put in late nights and those kids aren't acting exactly the way you want them to act, and you can't figure out how to get concepts across to kids. And sometimes your passion doesn't match every situation. Well, all the time it doesn't match every situation. Just because a position isn't for you or you don't get a position doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. There isn't a match always between a school and you. You can spend a lot of time right now exploring what type of students, what type of curriculum, what kind of environment do you like to work in. And the more you get to know yourself, I think the more you'll be able to find that match as you move forward.
Okay, I agree with that, and I'm actually here to learn from this panel up here as well. So, and I think as you're preparing now, the search is great and the passion is wonderful because we're going to talk about character a lot tonight. But also, you're making connections right now, and some of you are student teaching or getting ready to student teach. So don't forget the character that you display now and the connections you make now are going to be very important when it comes time for that job search, because you make connections with professors and teachers in the field. So your student teaching is very important. You're going to rely on those people as references that we are going to call, because that may be the only experience you have. And so we want to see those, and we want to talk to those people, and we want to hear, she's the best I had, she's the best I've ever. So really focus on that career now in what you're doing, in your classes and in your student teaching.
The only other thing I think I would add, just to kind of go a little different direction, is to make sure you're exposing yourself to as many different avenues as you possibly can out there. Whether it is getting onto Twitter, there's some great educational people out there some of the great leaders out there in the educational world, educational research. They'll communicate back and forth with you with questions and topics that you may have. Keep learning what the latest trends are in education, whether it's things from the flipped classroom to all the great things going on in technology now, and the way Edmodo is changing the world, and with the iPad generation coming in, all those kinds of things. Just try to expose yourself to as much of that as you can. Don't just focus on, I'm a social studies teacher and that's the only thing I need to know about, or a math teacher, or whatever it might be. Try to get your horizons broadened as much as you possibly can, and get exposure to as many different areas as you can, because education is so much different than when all of us went through. You're experiencing some new things, I'm sure, as well, but it's just different out there today than it was even 5 years ago, and what's getting ready to happen in the next 5 years and 10 years. So just stay current with what's going on in education for sure.
Can I ask a question? What kind of an audience do we
That
have?
was one.
I'm curious.
How many are elementary? Oh, lots. All right, let's see how many are middle, high school interest.
Woohoo! Heck yeah.
How many of you boys are elementary?
Oh, wow.
Look at, first become a male, okay? Looking for male elementary teachers. I have a hard time getting male elementary teachers.
The secretary is.
Secondary
When he's here.
teachers, what content area are you interested in?
Speech and theater for me.
Okay,
English and the ESOL endorsement.
okay. And what, was there one?
History, got my endorsement and specialty.
You know, that was another thing you can do now, and as you mentioned, ESOL, it's such a diverse population out there, and you never know where you're gonna land. The more endorsements that you can be pursuing are really helpful to you. Makes you versatile, because everyone we hire in isn't necessarily, where we hire them in is not where they're gonna be 5 years from now. They may be just getting your foot in the door, especially if you're social studies. Seems like we have a real large group of English teachers right now coming up. But if you have some uniqueness and can get in the door, then things will kind of start to happen for you.
Okay, the second question that we have, and if anyone has questions, feel free to ask them. We just have a list of some questions that we came up with. But next one says, what does the application process look like in your district or school?
Well, we can start in Olathe. You would typically, and Mike, you jump in if I misspeak here. You're typically going to have a screening. Well, during your student teaching, you're going to have a swap in Olathe. You're going to swap schools with another elementary principal, and they will interview all of our student teachers. So currently, my student teachers that are in my building will have a mock interview with another Olathe principal, and that will be kind of your first trial interview. You'll also be screened with the district HR does a pre-screening, and then those names get put into our principal baskets for candidates that are interested in positions. From there, then we select from all the applicants that are in our basket to start interviewing people. I believe it's really important for you guys to make sure your resume looks strong. You really sell yourself on that, because the first set of my eyes that see you is just on paper. I'm going to be looking through that list of candidates, and I'm looking for things that are going to jump out and go, oh wow, what about this one? So once you then come into our door and have an interview with us, if you don't receive the first position that you interview for, you won't be interviewing at multiple schools at one time in Olathe. If you interview at Havencroft, until I fill a position, I hold your applicant in my basket, and then once that position's filled, your application is then sent back out into more baskets. Does that make sense? So a lot of times, I will hear that candidates say, well, all my friends are getting interviews. Well, if you're not, don't stress, because my neighbor might be considering you, and until she says, okay, I'm done with looking at this application, I might not get to see yours. So that's a little bit how it looks at the elementary level, and I think every district has a little bit of a different process, and I think that's really important. If you can find someone from those districts that you're interested in and say, what does it look like in Blue Valley, or what does it look like in Shawnee Mission, or those different places, so that you kind of know that it's different district to district.
And we have an HR department that it's all screened through in very similar process. Probably minor differences as far as that goes. And I'd say just get to know the process. In our district, you would go through the Human Resources Department to start to understand the process. Sometimes people like to, drop the emails to the principal and try to stop by and want to make a good show, but really, that doesn't give you much of an advantage. Just, stay connected with the HR department, stay communicating with them, at least in our district, that's the way it is. And you will work through the system as far as that goes. I think your resume is critical, and I think that was a really good point. That's what we see. That's all that we see first. And we screen through, because we're not going to interview everybody whose resume comes through the process. So something needs to stick out that's interesting to us, that raises our attention. Maybe have somebody you don't know read it, or don't know well. Or find a critical friend that can be a support and give you advice around that. Because when I look at the resume, I start Googling and calling and trying to figure out, I wonder what this is about. And I do a lot of reference checks before I choose my interview candidates, because the time is not endless, so we want to be strategic in who we pull in. And if I can call a reference and they're like, well, it's kind of mediocre, I'm not going to waste my time on that interview. So I definitely would encourage you to make your resume look good, and realize that people really do go in and dig into you, do a little searching out on you.
And see, we're totally different because we're a small school. And so I only have 2 elementary schools, so they don't go from basket to basket. They do have to stand out. The single most important thing we do, other than educating our children, is hire the right people. We do spend a lot of time on that, and we don't want to put the wrong person in the wrong seat on the bus. We want to get the right people, because we don't like to do the 3-year and rotate and all of that. So we will spend some time on that. How do you make it stand out? And maybe that's one of our questions a little bit later, but it really does, because when you get 50 or 60 applicants for one position, and then we're done with them, and I'm going to interview 4, there could be a lot of good ones in there, a lot of good people. And I know when we were getting tons of applicants, I felt really sorry for, because even the 4 that we interviewed, I could probably live with all 4 of them were outstanding. And so we'll talk a little bit later about what you do once you get that interview. But if you don't get that interview, you don't get a chance to show yourself off a little bit. So the application process, just make sure you have everything turned in that you're supposed to turn in. Now, there's nothing wrong with checking with the clerk or whoever's taking those applicants to make sure your file's complete. You're not bugging them and saying what's happening. You're just saying, do I have everything in? I don't have a problem with that. And because if not, if you spell something wrong and they're all looking alike, it goes in that pile. That's when we're starting to weed them down, because we've got to weed through them. And I look at it, and it's a great gal, but it just looks messy. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look good. You're in that stack, and then you can hope all you want, and it's not going to happen. So spend some time on that process.
I think, I don't know if there's anything else to add to what they've said in regards to that topic, except again, it is just so critical that you spend that quality time, because as you all raise your hands in here, especially at the elementary, you're all competing against each other. Back when we were all hiring, all the districts were hiring multiple people every year, it wasn't as big of a deal, but right now, I may not hire a single teacher this year at Pioneer Trail, and I've got over 60, and because we're growing, I'm supposed to get 2 new teachers this year, but they're probably going to come within the district, more than likely. The jobs are just so hard to get out there. Don't mess it up before you even get a chance to get your foot in the door. Take time when you're going through those processes. When you fill all that stuff out online, it's a long, drawn-out, sometimes a nuisance of a process to do, but it's what you got to do to go through the process to get your foot in that door.
So it goes back a little bit to what we said earlier. If everything looks good, and I do the reference check that we talked about a minute ago, because I know somebody on there, and you put your references, I know that person. You've got a good reference, and they know you. When I know them, they're going to shoot square with me, and I like to hear things like they were in the top 5% of all that I had. They, not just the normal good kind of stuff, but something that says, here's how this person stood out. I would hire her in a second if I had an opening, or him.
And you need to kind of get your language around that, what makes you so unique. And that's one of the hardest things for teachers to do. I think it's hard for all of us, but teachers are compassionate and giving, and sometimes it's hard to sing your own praises. But when you're in this position, you want to make sure you understand what makes you good and unique. Not singing false praises, but there's some qualities about you that make you pretty special. And if you don't tell anybody about them, nobody's going to know, because you are just a blank slate to us right now.
I think that I'd like to piggyback on that. When we said earlier, talking about your student teaching experience, that's a great opportunity to treat every day like your first interview. And it's critical, because every day in that building that you're in, you are showing those teachers, the administrator, the office staff, the custodians, what you have to offer that building. And at least in Olathe, principals, when we have openings and we have 300 applications, we send those emails around and go, did anybody have an intern that stood out? Because I've got 15 applications, and if your name is sent through that email process and your name's in my basket, you just got your foot in the door. So remember, that's really critical, that when you're in those buildings every day, you really have to be careful what you're doing in that building and how you're carrying yourself. Like, there's your first interview.
And don't forget, you can start your work early on. I don't know how far everybody is in the process, but we have a lot of partnerships with UMKC, Park College, different universities around, and they come and do observation hours. Well, we never let anybody sit and observe. Everybody gets up and rolls up their sleeves and works. But they start making an impression, maybe their sophomore year of college already with us. They volunteer in a tutoring lab. They do just make their name known. So it doesn't have to even be a formal process you're going through yet as far as student teaching. There might be ways for you to get your foot in the door and look for those opportunities. Hey, this organization sounds great. I heard about community service, and I mean, community service at the schools, that's a great place to do it. And to make yourself known, make your name known.
What are some of the questions that might be asked in an interview?
Let's start with you. You get the end of it.
You know, there are the basic questions, you know, make sure you're ready for, you know, tell us a little bit about yourself. And to be honest, we don't really want to know about where you went to elementary school. We're more concerned about your colleges and your universities you've gone to, and maybe programs where you've worked with youth, those types of things, your student teaching experience. And then personally, when I ask questions, because I know there's some questions here about Common Core and different things, I don't really ask a lot of questions, or do I really care that you know every detail about Common Core, you know every detail about this, that, or the other. But what I want to know is, how's Common Core going to impact your classroom? How's Common Core going to impact our students? And all the questions I ask all come back to really the student. Whether it's, you know, you're working with at-risk students or whatever it might be. I want to know, and I want to hear from you, your passion, your commitment to educating young people. That's really where it comes down to, because even if you don't know every great classroom management strategy, or if you don't know every great technique, those things I can teach you and work with you on. I cannot make you like kids. I really can't. I can take care of those other things. And so as you're going through that interview process, the questions I'm asking you are all geared towards that. And then the last question I ask in every interview is very simply, I'm interviewing however many candidates, 4 or 5 candidates, why should I select you? And I want you, that's where you get the chance to sell yourself. Sell your passion for working with kids, sell yourself as an educator, and all those kinds of things. And so that's kind of the approach I take to that process. And it may be, I'm sure we all do it a little bit different as far as that's concerned. So.
No, that first question about, tell us a little bit about yourself. And you're right, we don't need to know all the little details, but we also want to know, and when you as a teacher connect with a student, it's because you've shared something about yourself, which is really important. And I'm trying to find somebody that's going to fit on my team. And I'm going to find somebody I like. If I don't like you, forget it. I want to like you, and so I need to know something more about you that's personal. I like to run. You might throw something out that we're going to pick up on. I was a cheerleader in college, and we're needing an assistant cheerleading coach. Now, we picked up on something that you just shared about yourself that was personal. I like to read, and I have 2 brothers and a sister. I grew up on a farm. That's okay for me, because I have to know more about you. Not forever, but I want to know something that I can pick up on. And that's where you get a chance also to smile a little bit and to let it down, because we're talking later about how do I not be so nervous? We're having a conversation. We're having a conversation about you and me. And at the end, when we ask that question, we're also going to say, what questions do you have for us? And we'll say, will want to come up with. Have a couple of things ready, because you've done your homework on this school, remember, before you even got there. So you do have some legitimate questions, not salary. Okay, that's not the first thing we're gonna
That's so true, and he used the word conversation. I oftentimes, through an interview and we're done, and I can tell the candidate is waiting for the questions. I like to sit down and have a conversation, and I really do, just want to know who you are. And I can hear from you as you tell me about yourself and we get off on another topic, whether you're going to have that persona that connects with people. This is such a people-driven career area that you're into. This profession is one that you've got to have strong relationships, and if you have that cold edge or you don't warm up to people, I'm not sure you're going to warm up to kids real well. And it's really important that we feel that out. As it was said, we can teach you how to lesson plan, classroom management, all those kind of things, and it's not a quiz that you get right or wrong. Maybe that's something to keep in mind. Your interview is not a test. It's a conversation. And there are going to be times you're going to walk away and you're going to say, that was a nice person, but this doesn't feel right. And there's going to be times you walk away and I'm going to say, wow, they're going to be a great teacher somewhere, but it doesn't fit the chemistry we have right now here. When students go off to college, I tell them, make sure you're going, before you choose your college, walk on the campus and you'll know if it's yours. You know if it's home for you. You know what I'm talking about? Well, there's a piece of that when you get your first teaching job. Don't just grab a job just because you want a job. Because if you're not connected to it, you won't be shining with the students, and it is going to be miserable for you. If you're miserable, you are not going to be the best of who you can be. So it's a real important piece to understand that good fit and that good feel. It's out there for you. There's a job with your name on it, if this is the direction you're wanting to go.
I think to add on to what they've said, remember that all of us have been on the other side of the desk. We all started in the same place that you are. So to help keep yourself not so nervous in this interview situation, just remember, we've all been there, and so we know exactly what you're going through. Some of us are a little scarier than others of us, but we all started out the same. And, being able to have that conversation, talk to the person that's interviewing you, admit when they ask you a question, something that you go, I'm clueless. That's okay. We don't want you to bluff us. We want you to tell us, I'm teachable. This is where I am in that process, and I'd be great on your team. So kind of keep that in mind, that we've all started out in the same place. Through your student teaching, you get an opportunity to hear some feedback that will help you in that interview. You can say, I learned that I have a little cold edge to me, and this is how I've worked to get beyond that. Or, that's your opportunity to really show that you're teachable and you can make adjustments to fit on a team.
I have a quick question. Within an interview, for me, my faith is really important to me. And if I want a school to get to know me, that's part of who I am, is what I believe. Would you recommend, or is that something that you look for, is people with like a faith-based thing? Not like prefer faith-based people, but would you like somebody to share that with you in an interview, or it doesn't matter?
I think balance is what I look for and is the key. If that's all we're talking about, then I'm thinking, well, maybe it won't fit. But I want people with compassion. I want people with faith. We constantly talk about things like that with kids all the time. I know there's the separation of church and state and all of that, but kids are real. Yeah. Kids go to church. Kids have beliefs. Kids are going through things through life. We don't sit and try to evangelize with them, but it's a part of their world. If it's a part of your world, you're genuine, it's a part of your world. I don't think you put a hold on it and say, ooh, I better not talk this. But if it gets carried away, then it's going to raise my interest a little bit, thinking, oh, wait a minute, are we a little out of balance as far as...
Don't include it in every answer.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we say, tell us about you, you can say that. My faith is important to me, my family's important to me, I like to jog, and you've got it in there, and that's cool, I mean, we're good with that. But if every time we ask you a question, you say, well, I pray about that as well, and,
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Only because not that it turns me off so much, but you have to connect with, not just with the students, but you have to connect with my staff as well. You're gonna be on that team, and
Yeah. During your student teaching, I think it's a great opportunity to get to know the faculty of a building. If you were student teaching at Havencroft, for example, you would very quickly find out that we have a pretty large percentage of our teachers that are Christians, and we have prayer group on Friday. If you're someone who has a really strong faith, you might be willing to join that group on Friday morning. It's before the day starts. Again, it's another place that you would connect. Whereas at a different elementary school that maybe didn't have the same population of teachers, you might be student teaching there, and you might discover, wow, this fit might not be just right for me. And that's a great thing to explore carefully explore during that student teaching opportunity.
good question. Mm-hmm.
I know I kind of stress on like using such specific terminology, and I don't. Do you guys prefer to hear someone who can just spit out a lot of terminology, or someone who can speak from the heart? Because I just worry that like if I'm using a bunch of terminology that I've learned and I could tell you about, it might sound more like I'm telling you about what I learned, not about like how I feel about what I learned and what I know.
My personal opinions go with the feelings. Usually if you're just spitting out the jargon and all those kinds of things, one, we can usually see through that that's what you're doing versus what your real passion is. And I think that's what you've got to go by, is what's in here, and your passion for education, your passion for working with kids and so on.
Another good question. But what he said he could see through, it's because if we add up all the interviews we've done, hundreds and hundreds of interviews, we can, and especially when you have a whole team up there, you're not trying to play a game with anybody. We want to know what you got, what are you bringing to the table, and so it's your chance to tell us what and who you are. Not, I prepared for this test, I crammed last night, now here it comes.
When the jargon comes out, sometimes I think, oh, wow, they had all the right answers, but I don't know if I really got to know them. And I don't want to walk away with somebody who has all the right answers and I can't get to know them through that process.
I have a question. For prospective teachers that you're interviewing, like I'm dyslexic, and that's something that is a huge part of my life, and it will influence how I teach and how I relate to kids. But it's also a weakness of mine because spelling is always going to be an issue. And is that something that you guys would? I mean, I'm sure do you guys want to know that in that interview? Is that something that's going to kind of maybe impact your decisions, or does that make sense?
I don't necessarily think it's going to impact my decision one way or another, but I also believe that gives you a connection to many of the people that you potentially could work with in the field. It would give you an understanding maybe of the students that you're going to work with. You know where they're coming from, you've understood the frustrations that your family has worked through to kind of get the accommodations that you needed. So I don't think it's going to hinder our decision one way or the other, but I think it's information that if it has an opportunity to come up, then it's not something that would hurt you by any means.
I think it will help us get to know you. And that makes you more transparent. And there's a part of being a teacher, a strength of that is being transparent with your kids. I'm sure you've heard the kids will read you in probably the first 5 minutes and know, well, that's pretty much a lot of times an interview. Sometimes we'll know in the first 5 minutes if you're putting on a show or not, and we're reading some things. And if there's things about you that you're holding back, maybe we won't know what you're holding back, but we might see that in your persona, the way you carry yourself, is you're being guarded about something. We don't always know when we're not being truly forthright what that does to our body language, but it does something. And so I just think be transparent and be who you are. If that means you don't get a job, then that job wasn't meant for you, because that's who you are. Don't try to be who you're not.
And I almost see that as a selling point for you, because I would guess that at some point schooling and education was probably tough, certain aspects of it, and you've overcome that, and you've chosen to want to get into education. So that, to be honest, says a lot for me about you, that you've made this decision to go into education.
Go ahead.
Do you guys have any advice as to what we should bring to an interview? Because at school here, we all make online portfolios. Should we bring you the link to that, or do you guys look at those? So, anything like that?
I would say, if you have something, you bring it. If they want to look at it, they look at it. If you don't have it, you don't have it. I often ask, when I invite someone in for an interview, I ask them to bring a lesson plan that they've taught, and we talk about the lesson plan sometimes. And there's times that I ask them to bring it, we never get to it. It kind of depends where the conversation goes, but I wouldn't hold back if you have something. Just know that it's something that you have available to them, and might just put you out in front.
One thing I would say to avoid though is don't bring me a binder and then want it back. You know, leave it with me, because I'm probably not gonna get it back to you, quite honestly, or you're gonna have to come back, and if you're the person that I wouldn't select, that can be a little bit of an awkward situation, quite honestly, that, hey, come pick up your binder. I didn't choose you, Howard, come pick your binder up. The other thing kind of related to that, depending on some of the positions, sometimes I'll have the person doing mini lessons, I mean, literally teach, stand up and walk me through a 10-minute lesson. And do that, and so I think that's something to think about and be prepared to do. You know, what can you do in a short 5 to 10 minute quick lesson? Or I might ask you, walk me through what's going to happen if I was to be in your classroom from bell to bell. What am I going to see? Walk me through the different parts of what's going to happen. So I think you can bring things related to that. I think that's worthwhile to do for sure.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm impressed with your online portfolio, because I haven't had an opportunity to see very many of those in western Kansas. We haven't seen a lot of those. We've seen, you know, the binders, and so to me, this is just Glenn. I'd like to see that somewhere in your resume when you first send me your stuff, because I look through all your stuff. I'm going to look through it, especially if we're bringing you in, we're making the phone calls, and if that's there, I have a chance to look through that well before you come in. So I would like to see that early.
You know, and generally, at the elementary level where I am, if you're joining a team of 3, I'm gonna have the team with me generally in that interview. Sometimes when we get down to 1 or 2 candidates, we're really gonna dig into some of that extra. So if you have that available to us, even if we look at it before, like Glenn said, it gives us connection to you, and sometimes it separates you from another candidate. More importantly, from bringing stuff to me, I want you to bring those experiences. When I ask you to tell me what you know about classroom management, I'm looking for you to talk me through situations that you've worked through in classroom management that show me, you know, what you're talking about. Real life experiences. So really organize in your mind. When they ask me about Common Core, what have I done that demonstrates that? So organize those experiences for me and bring those experiences in your mind. That's really more valuable to me as an elementary principal than the stuff. But the stuff helps out in that final decision-making piece.
I have a question. I'm student teaching now, and we're working with building our resume and all of that, having that prepared. Something that I don't know if there's a maybe rule of thumb for your references that are at the bottom, for you who are looking at the resume firsthand, do you prefer that to be alphabetical or maybe order of relevance, if that makes sense? Maybe having the cooperating teacher first and then a principal, or does that matter to you? Is that even worth?
How many do you have?
I'll have 5 on my bottom.
I think from my perspective, the references, I'm gonna look for in the online application, I think it has a separate place for references off of your resume.
Oh, does it on most online applications? Is that what you mean?
I believe so. I think with Olathe, and I'm probably not gonna care one bit how you organize those at all. That's the elementary gal in me. They're there and I'll just pick through those. Not always do we look at all 5. I might call the first 3 and they all say the same thing and I go, I'm good. Or if I'm getting conflicting information, I might call all 5. So from an elementary perspective, I wouldn't really have a preference to how you organize them. It would be whatever works for you.
And I really like to see an administrator, a principal, or at least an assistant principal on there somewhere. And oftentimes it comes without one. I think oftentimes a teacher and their cooperating teacher get a good relationship developed. And so I anticipate probably something good is going to be said. But I want to hear what the administrator says. And sometimes I hear the administrator says, well, yeah, I think she taught with so-and-so. And so there was no connection with the administrator in the building. And that's a concern of mine. I want some type of a relationship developed.
I would say along those lines, not every building administrator is going to come to you as a student teacher and say, hey, I'm going to come in and observe you or do a kind of a walk you through a formal observation process, but you ought to go ask. I love when the student teacher comes up and says, hey, I'm here from this point to this point, sometime in there, would you please come in and observe me? And I take all of my student teachers, walk them through as if it was a formal observation through that whole process. And then I would be very leery on your references if I don't see those people that you've been working with.
Sure.
And that's happened before when you look at somebody like, I wonder why their cooperating teacher's not here, or somebody from that building. Immediately the red flag flies in the air and you're wondering what something bad must have happened during that student teaching experience or whatever it might be. So.
And being an administrator, we know a lot of administrators. So we see a friend, a colleague, somebody we know on there. As far as the order, if you have 30 of them, then something's wrong and then you'll need to alphabetize them. But if you have 4 or 5, we don't care. I don't care what order. It doesn't matter. We're going to pick those relevant ones, whether they're first or third. Doesn't matter.
What are some examples of ways that you've seen people stand out? Do you ever see any ways that was?
I can give you an example right off the bat. When she was talking about making that connection in your student teaching, I had a situation today in our building where my PE teacher is going to leave early in the evening. He helps out my life skills classroom in dismissal. We take our life skills kids one-on-one, hand-in-hand to the bus. And he sent out an email to our staff that said, I'm starting to coach golf. I need help with dismissal. Anybody can cover. Student teacher X sent an email back and said, I'm here on all these days and I'm happy to step in and do it. Now her student teaching responsibilities are not, that is not part of her responsibilities, but do you think I will remember her name? Absolutely. She's made that connection with me without us ever having to do anything assignment-wise, but she showed up and really gone that extra mile in my building. So any opportunity like that you have to really become part of that building when you're in there is great.
And in doing that, also get to know other staff members, because teachers talk. And teachers will drop by and see me and say, wow, that student teacher that so-and-so has up there is really strong. If we ever need someone, or like I have a lot of student observers who are like pre-service still, and they're observing 10 hours maybe a semester, but they come for extra, and then they go to help tutoring, and people are just like, wow, wait till she's a student teacher, let's see if we can get her here, and so there's a lot of connections you can make with other teachers, and they talk. They'll let us know who's strong out there. They want someone on their team that can be a partner with them.
I would just say, in some cases, if you're interviewing in a district or a building you have a student taught in, I wish I could sit there and tell you that, boy, if you say this, you're going to get the job. But I don't know what this is. But what is so obvious, and I think with all the interviews that we've done, it is so obvious when you're sitting down with somebody who, and when you come back to this passion piece and this love for education, this love for working with kids, it is so obvious when that person has that. And that's really what I look for, again, more than anything else, is that piece right there. And if you have that, you're going to get hired just like that. If you don't, you better get it. Because it's obvious when you don't have it too. Whether it's the way you answer the questions, whether it's just your demeanor through the process. That's what I look for, is it. That one little piece is the key for me.
Yeah, because when you finish an interview, the team doesn't sit around and say, they had the proper protocol with the Common Core steps. They say, I liked her. I loved him. Did you have a question over here as well?
I did. I was actually going to go off of one of the questions that was asked earlier going as a student teacher and asking one of the administrators or someone else in the building to come sit in when you're teaching one day. What about when you're not a student teacher, but you're actually going in the field and you're actually getting that work and working with the students and getting a chance to have some of the lessons within the classroom? Would that still be beneficial? Or did you even follow what I asked?
I didn't.
Okay, let me start over.
You go first.
I guess I started talking fast. Well, I'm not student teaching yet.
Okay.
I'm just working in the field right now within, one of them is a Turner School District, and it's an Endeavor High School, and there's only one administrative teacher there. So I have an opportunity to get to know her very well. Would it be beneficial for me to ask her to come in, if she can, within her time frame and her busy schedule, to come listen to me as an educator, future educator, when I'm teaching? I'm trying to give the lesson.
And I think handle it just like you did. I mean, with the way you verbalize it there. Hey, if you get a chance, I know I'm not student teaching. This is the role I'm in. I'd love for you to come in and just kind of observe what I'm doing, because I need your input, because I want to be a great teacher. What feedback can you give me? Just even what little activities you might be doing that would help me, somewhere down the line. I think that's a great way to handle it.
Because I know when I first met with her, she sat me down and she explained to me the school, what kind of a school it was, what kind of students I'd be coming into contact with, and asked me for questions and such, and basically asked me if I was ready to go and see the rest of the school. So automatically I had that comfortable conformity
Know
with her.
that we look at you, no matter how young you're coming in, and we kind of sized you up. Ooh, would this be a good fit? And so, if you're a good fit for the situation, we're always willing to come in and help you grow.
We start interviewing you when you walk in the door.
That's right.
When you're waiting, and the fact that you were there 10 minutes early, like you're supposed to be, not half an hour, not 10 minutes late, but you're just a little bit early. We're going to continue to interview you and evaluate you when we're giving you the tour afterwards, because we want you to, we want to, still, that's the getting to know you piece. Because if you're totally different then than you were sitting in there, because I had an opportunity to interview a teacher once that was the Teacher of the Year in Minnesota, who wrote the Family Consumer Science, I think it was Minnesota, it was some other state, who wrote the state's curriculum, and outstanding reviews, and she was phenomenal on paper. And I had a conversation with her on the phone, and she said, well, can I have, and we couldn't find family consumer science teachers, but I would not do that. And I said, you have to come here. I need to see you. You must come here for the interview. So we had to arrange a time when she could fly down, and she couldn't smile. She sounded great on paper. She talked the talk. She never smiled. She didn't get the job. She needed to smile once. We gave her a tour of the building, and I asked my assistant, did she crack? No. Okay, that's just my funny story.
Well, and he brings up a good point when he said assistant. It made me think of the secretaries. Remember, the secretaries are sizing you up too, and they really know. They can read, because they work with a lot of teachers. And in fact, one of the most recent administrators I hired, I called down on references, and everybody was gone for the summer, but all the secretaries were still there, and they gave me the best references. They passed the phone around. The secretaries have a lot of information, so everybody you run into is interviewing you.
Secretaries and custodians at the elementary level.
And when you're touring, the other teachers are eyeballing you too.
Yeah.
Going off her question, I'm a freshman this year, and I work at a Y Care, and we're in the cafeteria of an elementary school. So should I be? I know the principal well enough because he comes in every day and will tell us if any kids have had problems. So should I start making connections now with him, or it wouldn't hurt?
First of all, thanks for coming as a freshman. That's great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Really awesome.
And for doing Y care, for God's sake.
We have 6 teacher kids right now.
There's quite a few of you in here, isn't there? White here?
That's awesome.
Well, you know what? If that person ends up being a reference, they're going to say, I've known her for 4 years. And if you have a bad impression now, it's going to seem like 20 years. They really don't. So if you build that kind of a relationship with everybody you meet, so you bet. Yeah, always build them. Some of you may be working for one of us one day. I mean, so you can't ever burn any of those bridges, because we move around a lot. Educators get shuffled around a lot. You say, well, I never liked him anyway, now I got placed in his building. You know, so.
Well, and don't forget, you are also a support for each other. There are a couple places that if I have a candidate from a certain school, I'm going to make sure I give them a top-notch interview, because I've gotten some fantastic candidates from that school already. And a couple of their professors will call me and say, hey, I think I have someone for you. They're going to get to the front of the line because I've had some good hires from them before. So you go out and do a good job. You're helping your fellow classmates here for years to come. Don't forget that piece.
And that's true of student teachers, because when our district asks, hey, do you have anybody in your building that would be willing to take a student teacher? I'll have teachers that come and say, yes, but not from here, because they had a bad experience with a student teacher from that school or that program before, and so.
And it may not be the school and the program, it may be just one individual, but it taints the view of
It does, it really does.
Do you have any funny stories? I know you said one, but we always like.
I have
to hear
more.
those.
Go with the funny
Most of them involved me, though, when I was trying. But the thing is, don't forget your funny stories. But you have a couple of steps. One is to get the interview. You can be, you can have that interview down in your head, and you've practiced, and you've gone to several of the career days that you practice those interviews. You practiced in front of a mirror. Your sister has asked you the questions. But if you can't get that interview, and you're that close, it really doesn't matter. So all those little connections we talked about are so valuable. When I got my first superintendent job, they wanted somebody with experience, by gosh, and they wanted somebody with a doctorate. And at the time, I didn't have either one. But a connection that I had called and said, you gotta look at this guy. And so I was the token green guy in the candidate pool. Well, then they liked me, and I had an opportunity to do that. But without having those connections in the field with everybody you meet, and always being at the top of your game, you may not get it.
That's interesting, because I just had an English teacher candidate, and I was hiring an English teacher in December, and this candidate did not come through, but I was getting calls from people that I knew, had relationships with, who said, ooh, there's this young girl out there who's just finishing up, don't know if she's going to apply yet, but I want you to know about her. And after she chose not to even apply for a job. She went ahead and finished up her ESL endorsement, and then she's ready to go. Well, end of January, I'm not hiring anymore, but I'm still getting calls from people. I ended up with 4 different calls, and they were different parts. One was from her church, somebody who just knew me, and she was just having conversations with people, and they were like, oh, Wyandotte, yeah, I know. And when they found that out, they dropped me a note about her. Somebody way out in Gardner that a retired teacher that I hadn't seen for 5 years dropped me an email. So I was getting these strange coincidence of emails. So, and then one day she called and just said, hey, I just want you to know I'm going to be applying for the fall. And right now I'm going to look at being a sub, but I understand you're not hiring any subs. And I said, that's not true. We are hiring subs. Well, she had gotten a phone call, or she had gotten a connection with a secretary or an administrative assistant who had said, we're done until the fall, giving her erroneous information. So I was able to get her in and get her sub license set up and get her in. Now she's subbing almost every day for us. She was persistent, not pushy. It was gentle nudges, and it was connections coming from all sorts of different directions. And I guarantee if I wasn't still getting those It just was like bizarre. Another one was coming, another connection was coming that was unrelated to the one before that. I would have just kind of put her aside and she would have just gone on to a pile. So perseverance is key in a gentle way. And don't forget everybody you know around, whether it's at church, whether it's a family friend, just kind of look for those connections, and there might be that gentle nudge. Don't push it, but just know that that might be something that connects you in and gets you that energy.
This is about the schools, but now that the middle schools are 6th through 8th, would you guys consider hiring an elementary teacher for 6th grade? Because I'll have my ESWL endorsement for K through 12.
You bet.
So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the great thing about 6th grade and with the elementary endorsement, it's a very flexible grade level for us because you can teach all 4 of the core subject areas typically with your endorsement. But then when we start getting into the 7th and 8th grade, then you've got to get highly qualified in certain select areas. But yeah, most of our 6th grade teachers are elementary endorsed teachers. So.
Are there any crazy or maybe not typical questions that you would like to share? Maybe you don't want to share your tricks with us, but something that might catch us off guard. I know sometimes they'll try to warn us in our seminars or, classes here, just things that they've heard, but is there anything that maybe is very unexpected that we
I have an assistant principal who always asks every time, and he catches me every time he says it, is, are you a cat or a dog? And a lot of times it just stumps them, and other times they have an answer and they move right along. So, I mean, just bizarre things like that.
I love that.
Yeah, I don't.
Like,
I don't say anything like that, or even, I don't think attempt to do that. One thing I would just, and I don't know that maybe it was on there, you might be thinking about, usually at the end, as it was mentioned, we will ask you, what questions do you have for us? To be honest, if somebody flips the page and they've got 16 of them, that's a downer for me when that happens. But I think,
You may not know the answers.
But I think you ought to have one or two things like, if you're asking of me, what is it that you're looking for in a teacher in your building? Do you have a mentoring or some type of an assistance program for me as a new teacher in your building, in your district? Be thinking about some of those kinds of things. Again, never go to the money, the benefits. One, we're not going to talk to you about it anyway because that's a human resources thing, but that's, again, a downer for us when we hear that type of conversation. Or don't be asking how many days you get off for spring break, things like that. Focus in on again, things that are key for that educational piece.
We ask you your strengths, and many times we'll turn right around and say, what are some areas you need to improve upon?
Sure.
How do you answer that one?
Do you look for people who are, because for me, at times I struggle with classroom management. That's something that I'm working on in all of my practicums. Would you want somebody to be just completely honest about that? Like, well, I struggle
Pretty
with-
much do. A lot of times you like to turn it into a strength. You can't be too obvious about that. I'm much too organized, okay. I think you need to be fairly honest about that. First of all, we know you're not experienced. I saw the resume. So I know that. And so I would anticipate there'll be many areas that you might feel, because you haven't had the experience yet, that you might, an area you'd like to improve upon. I try to avoid weaknesses, but that's kind of what I'm looking at. I think you can be straightforward about that. That, again, tells me your genuineness. Man, I love it. But you know what? I really haven't had a lot of experience in classroom management, and so I think that would probably be an area I'd like to work on.
And I think just to piggyback that is also come back with my weakness is, or my area I think I need help is this, and here's what I'm doing to try to improve in that area. So that we know that you realize it and you're doing something about it.
That's a very good point.
You're doing something about it.
And I can say, I actually had a teacher that in the interviews, when I asked that question, said that very answer. The one area that I would probably think I need to work on is classroom management. So when I hired that individual, his support teacher, the first thing that I said to that support person was, He said he needs help in classroom management. And so what did we do? We put all of the supports for him in classroom management. And I can tell you now, he's a great classroom manager. And he probably was a little concerned like you were of, gosh, do I tell her? But the fact that he told me, I knew exactly what kind of support he needed right out of the chute. So that honesty piece is really important, because we're probably going to figure it out anyway. We're going to see where your weakness is. You might as well tell us up front and let us help you.
As an elementary teacher, there's a little bit of creativity that your room, I mean, you don't want your room just blank walls. And how much of that can we kind of express in whether resumes or cover letters, or do you want it very, very professional and kind of how like a business resume would be? Does that make sense?
It does. You know, I would encourage you, if you're doing that portfolio piece, get some pictures of that in that portfolio. That's a great opportunity. I would maybe leave that off the resume piece, but I would put that in your portfolio. Pictures are great, and that would be a great place to kind of shine with your creativity.
That's a great point, because we're trying to imagine you from in our office in that chair in a classroom. Sometimes an interview is the toughest way to tell how you perform. So it's the stuff we do before, it's the phone calls we make afterwards, it's the things we try to figure out. So we're trying to break this puzzle. So I like that. You know, when you look inside and we see you in a classroom busy or dirty making stuff with kids for messy math or whatever it is you're doing, that's a great idea.
Would you suggest pictures from like volunteer experiences that we've had, or study abroad or travel abroad experiences as well?
I think anything you do that shows us who you are and that passion for kids is great. Volunteer, or, you know, the volunteer kind of speaks even louder to your passion. It's not the required, it's what you're doing because it's what you want to do. So I think you could include all of that in those pieces.
Do you guys have any further advice that we didn't mention?
I cut you off on funny stories.
I don't really know that I have a lot of, I mean, I do have a lot of funny stories, but I'm trying to think. Mine are all really kid, you know, it's daily. Funny stories come daily in this profession. I have a funny story, I can think just off the top of my head today, funny story. My music teacher, her son goes to our school. And she would be 100% okay with me sharing that he sometimes gets some frequent flyer miles to visit me about different situations. And he's not naughty. He's just a 6-year-old little boy. And today was his day to read with the principal. So the first graders come down. We come 2 at a time, and they bring their little book boxes. And he came down, and we read, and I gave him their pencils and their bookmarks. And we were walking back, and I said, you know, Derek, you just really did a great job. This was the highlight of my day today. And as we turned the corner, he said, well, I love you so much that this was the highlight of my day. And I said, and that's why I do what I do. It's not the paycheck, it's not the title, it's not the crummy hours. It's because it takes one of those moments that you will hook onto, and you will have many. And that makes it all worth it. The crummy day that I had before 3 o'clock with my first graders, all was erased by one comment, and you guys will get those endearing moments when you're student teaching, when you're volunteering, and sometimes it's from the least expected little guy. So.
I don't have a funny story. I just would encourage you to explore the different type of schools that are around. I don't know the number of people who come in and either observe or work in the urban center, and they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that the kids are so great, as if they're not supposed to be great. And it might be your passion. And I go back to that. I said that early on, is the passion. If you can find your passion, your whole life is going to be transformed by being a teacher. If it's not your passion, or you don't match up to your passion, it's going to be a job. And so give yourself the gift of exploring. I had no idea about urban settings when I went through college. Never. I worked in a math lab when I was going through, and they were hiring from Kansas City, Kansas. This was 30 years ago. And they said, oh good, we could use someone that helps with some of the lower level math. So I took a job. and it became home, and it became my passion about everything. Never would I have thought that, and I kind of wish that I would have had experiences in different kind of settings to realize that early on, but I was lucky to have landed where I landed. But give yourself the gift of exploring outside your comfort zone sometimes, or outside just what you think is your place.
I think to add on to that is also at different levels. So many of you were elementary and you brought up the middle school. You know, I spent all of my teaching and previous administration at the high school level and said that there's no way I will ever go to middle school. And when you tell people that you work in a middle school, they're like, oh, God bless you, everything you can imagine. But it's the best place I've ever been. I will never go back to high school now that I've been there. And so I think, again, look at those other levels. And don't get, you know, even here in Olathe, my school, I've got 45% of my students living in poverty. I've got probably a dozen kids who are homeless right now who are coming in taxis and other vehicles that bring them to us on a regular basis. And so it's just, again, there's nothing more rewarding than to do what we get to do every day. I mean, I get to school and